Well, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. How is everyone? Let me welcome anybody who's new. If this is your first time listening today, welcome to you. And let me just mention, you have chosen a highly unusual episode to begin with. And for everybody else, returning listeners, especially those of you who've been with me from the beginning, I realize that this is perhaps a bit of a surprise. There was no mention in advance that I would be sharing with you a talk that I had with Kino MacGregor, and yet today you are going to listen to a talk that I had with Kino MacGregor. There are reasons why it wasn't announced in advance that I'm not going to get into right now. In fact, there is so much that I want to tell you about this episode, but I'm not going to, at least not right now, because I want you to be able to hear it with fresh ears. I don't want to taint the waters of your mind with my impressions and ideas, and I just think it would color your experience, and I want you to have your own experience with it. I imagine that there is going to be some discussion about this. I think I might even just have to do a whole separate episode just to talk about this episode. But what I do want to share is just a little bit of context for how this conversation came about and why it came about. I think it was about a month ago, Kino posted an article on Elephant Journal that was calling attention to the fact that Cody, which is an internet video delivery portal that hosts a lot of yoga teachers, including Kino and another teacher named Dana Falsetti, this online yoga video portal was sold to Alo Clothing Company. And this one teacher, Dana Falsetti, her whole message as a teacher is body positive yoga. She has this very impressive Instagram account doing all these incredible poses, but she has a big body. And that's her whole thing is body acceptance, body positivity. And Alo Clothing Company doesn't even make clothes for people in her size. So for her to have her video content owned and profited off of by a corporation like that was upsetting, and she posted something on her Instagram account about it, and then they came after her with a lawsuit. And then Kino wrote this article about that, calling for everybody to donate to a Kickstarter campaign to help her with her legal fees. Now, Kino also has her own thing going on with them because she has video content on there and she's got contracts with them, and she wasn't happy about it being sold to Alo either. And so after reading that article, I thought, wow, isn't this interesting? This is something that I've been talking about for years, about internet portals fleecing independent content creators like yoga teachers. You can go back and listen to the talk that I had with Douglas Rushkoff about this. And I just thought, wouldn't it be interesting to talk to Kino? Not to mention, she's an authorized Ashtanga teacher, and I haven't been able to talk to anybody really from within that community so much. So I just jumped over to her website, dropped a quick invitation into her contact form. I went back and forth with an assistant. We scheduled, we had to reschedule. Eventually, we hooked up, and this is what you're going to hear. Now, I should say that since this was recorded, there have been further developments. If I'm not mistaken, Dana Falsetti has settled that lawsuit with Alo at this point. There was some public apology that she posted, and I believe that her case is settled. I am not sure what Kino's situation is, though I do think she might still have matters pending. The only other thing I'm going to say about it is maybe just a little bit of a warning that it definitely got uncomfortable at times. At least it did for me. I don't know about for anybody else. And it was a challenging conversation. I had a couple of difficult questions I wanted to ask her. And I had intended to wait a little bit longer to get into it, but we ended up jumping right in. And I think I should just let the rest speak for itself, at least until some other point in the future. Okay, so before we listen to the talk, let me mention that this episode of Yoga Talks is sponsored by Karmasoft. Karmasoft is a complete online yoga studio management solution. And those of you who listen know I've talked about Karmasoft. I used this software when I owned a center in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. It was great. It made my life super easy. It's definitely better than Mind Body Online. If you or anyone you know is a yoga, Pilates, or fitness center owner, manager, or teacher, and you have to do any scheduling or class payments or accounting, all of it can be made easier and more efficient by using Karmasoft. I had the founder of Karmasoft, Rudy Senecal, on the podcast back in October 2017. I encourage you to go listen to it. The way he runs his business and the person he is, I can't recommend it enough. Check it out at karmasoftonline.com. Let me drop my stuff real quick. I've got a gig in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, May 5th and 6th. I've got a teacher training starting here in Easton, Pennsylvania, May 12th. And just a quick in advance shout out, I'm going to be back at the Feathered Pipe Ranch again, July 14th through 21st. You can find out about those events. You can listen to the archives of this podcast, read my blog, or find my online yoga video offerings at jbrownyoga.com. Any support that you might want to show for the podcast is greatly appreciated. Maybe you would go to a blog or a podcast page and make a direct donation, or go to Apple Podcasts and iTunes and write a review and give us some stars. We would be so grateful to you. Okay. I will touch base with you on the other side and just see how we're all doing. And then, we'll figure out what we're doing going forward. So, with that, here is a talk I had with Kino MacGregor. Hello?
Hi.
Hey, is this Kino?
This is Kino.
Hi,
Hold on a second. Give me 1 second. Let me try to get the audio working.
Okay.
Okay, actually I'm going to switch. Normally this works really well, but it's not doing it right now.
Are you using some kind of fancy mic? You could just put on, are you using a set of headphones?
No, actually I was in my car because my car has really good connection, but I'm going to switch to headphones.
Okay.
Really weird. Normally the car is awesome, but I don't know what it's doing, but I'll just swap over to headphones.
Okay. No rush.
Okay. Okay. All right, I'm good to go now.
All right. I think that sounds a little bit better for sure.
Okay, cool.
All right. What's up, Kino? How's your day going? You're in the car. You running errands?
Yeah.
What are you doing?
No, yeah, I am. I'm running around a little bit. And also, I wanted to make sure I was in a quiet space. And oftentimes a car is a quiet space. And, especially when you have a partner and they're doing stuff at home.
Yeah, and little kids. I know my wife was kind enough to take the little ones out to the park so I could have a little time with you that was a little quieter myself.
Cool. Very cool.
I totally understand.
Gotta go where we go. Yeah, this is life.
So you've locked yourself in your car to talk to me. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And it's great to talk to you. I've had you on like a list of people that I'd want to talk to forever because, one of the things I'm always sort of obsessing about unpacking on the podcast is people who rode the wave of yoga into the mainstream. And you're certainly somebody who I sort of witnessed. And we're very close in age, not too far apart. And we both started, I think in our 20s, and now we're in our 40s with kids and have to lock ourselves in the car so we can have a conversation or whatever.
Yeah.
So I'm always interested whenever I get someone like that on the podcast to kind of talk about how that happened for you and what your perspective is on that.
Absolutely.
But
super.
I also have to say, like, you're also kind of in the midst, or somebody, I don't even know how to say it right, but there's these two hot button topics. You know, there's the whole Cody app thing and Dana Falsetti, and then there's everything going on in the Ashtanga Yoga Community. And they're both really tough topics that I've been trying to talk about on the podcast, but they're really difficult. And I feel like I keep getting myself into trouble and people get mad at me. And, you know, and even like, so what I feel like is this is the first time we've ever talked. You know, this is the first time I've ever met you. And normally when I meet someone for the first time and I like have a first ever conversation with them, the first thing I talk with them about is not like the most difficult thing I could talk to them about. So I kind of want to start with the other thing first. And I hope also that it can lay some context for whatever views you might express on those hot button topics. I always feel like knowing where somebody comes from and how they got to where they are, it gives it a nuance so people can't have a knee-jerk reaction or something, you know?
Absolutely, yeah.
So I noticed, just like looking at your bio, that you also like came to New York and started your yoga in New York. Is that right?
Kind of. I actually did my very first class when I was 19 here in Miami, and it was at a gym, and it was a sort of relatively chill Shivananda style class, and it sort of planted the seed of yoga as a spiritual path and as a healing discipline. So when I was 22 years old, I walked into an Ashtanga yoga class without really knowing what Ashtanga was, to make the decision to really live a more peaceful life. After just a few short periods of time of practicing, I moved to New York City to go to graduate school. And this was part of my idea to, you know, get my life back on track. I realized in retrospect that what really drove me to sign up for that first Ashtanga class, even though I dabbled in yoga before, was a really sincere desire to kind of turn my life around, to find out how to be more peaceful, to find out where real happiness was coming from, and to really kind of pick myself up out of a period of what I can look back now and I can see was depression. And I'm
sorry, what were you going to study in graduate school?
Oh, well, I did study.
Yeah.
I got a master's degree from New York University in interdisciplinary studies. Oh. And so that's definitely, I completed my program. But what happened for me was when I moved to New York City, I thought that I was going to, I was on the PhD track. I was going to get a master's degree, and then I kind of knew where I wanted to, get my PhD. And I ultimately decided not to pursue that because I joined a traditional Mysore style Ashtanga yoga class, and I went to India. And I went to India when I'd been practicing Ashtanga for just like 10 months over summer break between, my first and second year of graduate school. And I stayed for 2 months. And that meeting with Patabhi Jois, that changed my life. I can look back now and I can really see that that meeting with him really gave me direction and guidance and faith to continue the practice all these years. So, I guess I did move to New York to start my real life, but it was more like yoga kind of came in and just took over from there.
Well, that's interesting. I was just talking to someone today earlier, another friend of mine who lives in London, who's an Ashtanga practitioner, but he has a very deep connection to Ashtanga, but not like you just described. Like he described it more his connection to the practice. But you said you've been practicing for 10 months prior. Would you say that your connection started with the practice, or you made it sound like the meeting with Patabhi Jois was really where it started?
Well, for me, I think I can look back and I can see that I was definitely a sincere spiritual seeker. That's something that was very much within myself. But the practice spoke to me in a way and gave me answers that, nothing else really did up until that moment. And I definitely was inspired by the practice. I'd been doing it for 10 months. And when I decided I wanted to go to India, I'd been doing it about 6 months, or maybe 5 months. And it was just something that almost like a wave just overtook me. And as I started to practice more, I still remember that when I found out that you could go to India and meet the living master who was then living, Patabhi Jois. And I just remember being filled with this, definitive drawing to go to Mysore. And I think what happened for me when I look back and I can see that meeting with Guruji, that meeting with Patabhi Jois, was that they say there are many different definitions of a guru, but one of those is a person whose presence imparts truth to words spoken by anyone else would be untrue. A person whose presence dispels the darkness, gives you faith. And what I can look back now and I can see is that from that moment forward, although I may have doubted myself, although I may have doubted, many things, primarily about myself, I realized that from that moment forward, I had faith in the practice. And it's not that I didn't have faith in the practice yet. It's just that when you've been practicing for, between less than a year, your faith isn't tested. But my faith was tested after that, through injury, through difficulty, through adversity, through just life challenges. And I can look back now and I can really see that, had I not gone to Mysore, had I not actually made the connection to the root of the practice, I probably would have quit at some moment along the way. I probably would have thought, it's getting too difficult, or now I have this little tweak in, my shoulder, and I would probably have gone off, or, the depression's back again, so yoga's not working anymore, and I probably would have quit somewhere along the way. So that's really what I give thanks for about having, going to India and being immersed in the traditional practice, was because I felt like that seed of faith was planted so deeply in my heart that it's been able to nourish me all these years.
And do you attribute your ability to turn things around, because you said that you had your things weren't going so good for you before?
Yeah, no.
Do you attribute that faith? How much of the faith is part of that?
Well, I think, I've struggled with depression since I was 9 years old, and it was undiagnosed for many years. So I was just kind of, you could say like a somewhat unhappy person, and I went through periods of trying to treat my unhappiness with, drug abuse. And in my heart, I really realized that I was searching for meaning. I was searching for God. And it was through the practice, that I was able to find my path. And I really attribute healing to three things: a daily yoga and meditation practice, a deep faith in God built through the experiences of the practice. And then the last thing, which is just a practical application I wish I would have found earlier, is I started to do cognitive behavioral therapy or dialectical behavioral therapy, and it was really, really helpful. I'd been to see numerous other therapists before, but that particular therapy gave me the tools to apply the many of the lessons and many of the philosophical tenets of the yoga practice really into how to work with the sometimes murky waters of the subconscious mind.
Wow, I mean, that's interesting. And you kind of went already there. I was going to wait longer. But you went all the way there, and your passion and you speaking from your truth is very clear. I guess I have to kind of ask then, because you went straight there and you used the word Guruji. I talked to my friend earlier today, and he chose to take down the picture of Patabhi Jois, and he doesn't use the word Guruji, and everything that's going on these days. I know there was the recent confluence that happened. Were you at that?
No, I wasn't at the confluence, but my husband was at the confluence, and I know that they did actually discuss this topic, and I think, it's a really important conversation in the yoga community beyond just Ashtanga yoga. So I think, what you're bringing up right now is the accusations and allegations of inappropriate hands-on assists that some former students are accusing Patabhi Jois of doing to them. And I wrote an article about this, and I fleshed this out as much as possible, and went over a couple of things. And I think the biggest and most important part about this is that in no uncertain terms, any of those assists that any of those women experienced were not okay. Period. End of story. You're the one in your body when you feel touched by someone. If it crosses a line for you, it's not okay. Period. End of story. That should not have happened. And then the second part of it is, what do we do with Ashtanga yoga today? And I don't believe that we need to throw out the whole system, nor do we need to throw out the teachings of Sri K. Patabhi Jois. But I think it needs to be very, very clear that, lines were crossed, and that was not okay. And how can we make atonement for that? And how can we set up clear, definitive guidelines, not only within the Ashtanga yoga world, but within the yoga world at large, so that we can make sure that never, in no uncertain terms, happens to any yoga student again. I'd also like to clarify that what's actually being talked about in the Ashtanga yoga world is the inappropriate of hands-on assists. Now, the unfortunate thing is that in the larger yoga world outside of the Ashtanga community, there is a problem of not just inappropriate hands-on assists, but there's a problem of inappropriate sexual advances, including sexual assault, including rape, and including pressure to engage in sexual acts by teachers in positions of power who are abusing those positions of power. So I think that this is really a larger and more systemic issue that needs to be addressed from the broader perspective of what happens in the guru-student relationship and the teacher-student relationship, and how can we make sure that people who are in those positions of power do not, under any circumstance, abuse their positions of power, whether it's to get sexual favors, whether it's to get, free apartment stays, or to just really in any way take advantage of the student and their openness to try to really, surrender to the teacher and give as much as they can. I don't know if you know this about me, but very early in my yoga journey, I'd been to India only once, and I came back, and I'd only been once, and I came back, and I was trying to teach yoga, living with my parents, trying to earn enough money to go back to India. And during this time, I had an encounter with someone that presented himself as a very high-level yoga teacher and spiritual guide. And when I walked into his yoga shala to ask if he would consider putting me on the sub list, he proceeded to sexually assault me, the entire time telling me how I was lucky to receive his teaching and how I should just surrender to the true guru and I should let go of everything. And I was blocked and he was divinely put in his place to open me up, and what a bad student I was for fighting back. And it's something, unfortunately, that I've heard from numerous other women, and not only from this one teacher, but from numerous other circumstances where usually a man in a position of power speaks to a young female yoga student and says things like, "You're blocked, and I'm here to open you up, and I really see something special in you." And either the young student falls for those kind of pseudo spiritual sexual advances, or in a case like mine, if they resist, they're forced into it the entire time, psychologically being abused and manipulated, while at the same time being sexually assaulted. And this is something, unfortunately, that's happening in the yoga world, and I've been a victim of it. I tried to report this to the Yoga Alliance, and they unfortunately have responded to me years ago with a stock email that just said something like, due to the high volume of emails we receive, we're unable to process any individual concerns regarding our teachers. Namaste. And then recently they reached out to me and we spoke about it, and they said that they're unable to take any action unless I file, a lawsuit against this man and take him to court and, seek criminal justice prosecution against him, which at this point I'm not interested in. I'm extremely interested and committed to creating safe space in not only Ashtanga yoga classes, but all yoga classes. So heinous misappropriation of power never happens again. And that's something I'm deeply committed to.
Well, first, I'm sorry that happened to you, and I think that you're right to point that there's much larger issues in the larger yoga community beyond Ashtanga where this abuse is happening. And I do think that some of the things, like what you're pointing to, is different than what is happening with Patabhi Jois. I do think we have to be careful because, you acknowledged that it was inappropriate, that no one should be touched in a way that they don't feel comfortable with. But you also use the word accusations and allegations, and I think it's pretty well established that this stuff happened. And I know that the people that it's happened to, the victims who are the people that don't get listened to as much, they have a few things that they're asking for, one of which is about the revering Sri K. Patabhi Jois. And I can hear in your voice your reverence for him, and I know that that's something that's hard for them, and that's why my friend took the picture down. He said if somebody has experienced trauma and they come in and that picture's there, he didn't feel that it was sensitive. And so I wonder, how do you balance, a reverence for Patabhi Jois in light of what is pretty clearly abuse?
Yeah, I think it's difficult. Like, I think it's really, really hard. And I totally get that because, at the same time I'll take it back to my own personal experience, at the same time that I experienced this awful situation with this teacher, who had sexually assaulted me, there were other people who just called him their teacher and they, continued to practice with him and, they didn't do anything about it and they just continued to align themselves with him. And so I understand that schism. The way that I'm like working with this in my heart is I'm conflicted about it, and at the same time, I almost feel like if I could call Guruji my grandfather, and I just found out that my grandfather had, groped a friend of mine when I was growing up, and I never saw it. And and they tell me about it, 30 years later, but my grandfather's dead. So I can't go talk to my grandfather about it. I can't put him on trial. I can't ask him about it. And I can't bring them into the room to mediate a grievance. I only have the word of my friend who's alive. So I'm going to back my friend up and say that should have never happened. At the same time, I'm not going to stop loving my grandfather. So it's a conflict. And I think that we don't like to, we want to have clear answers. We want to say like, okay, here's the hurt. Here's the way we make it go away. Let's remove all pictures of Sri Patabhi Jois, and then that will be atonement. But the truth of the matter is, once you've been violated, there's really nothing, I think, that can bring wholeness back. You have to find that, like me, I had to find that path to wholeness back within myself. And there have been, in my case, 0 acts of any sort of justice in the public sphere. And you could say that this particular teacher isn't as revered as Patabhi Jois, but so what I'm saying is I think that there is a conflict, and I'm not saying that there's not a conflict, but I'm doing my best, I would say, to hold that conflict within my heart and be able to recognize that, the relationship that I had with Guruji was very healing and very powerful for me. He never, in no uncertain terms, ever touched me in an inappropriate manner. And I never saw him touch another person in an inappropriate manner. So I never saw it. I'm not saying it didn't exist. I'm just saying I never saw it. Guruji's not alive. I can't go talk to him about it. I can't confront him about it. I can't talk to him about it. So I sit with a conflict, and I unfortunately don't have the means to resolve that conflict. The only thing I can point to is Sharat, his grandson. And I can say about Sharat that in no uncertain terms, Sharat has never crossed the boundary like that. He has never crossed a boundary like that. So whatever actions had been in place in the past, or whatever actions Guruji had engaged in that had created this deep trauma in the victims of the unwanted sexual touching, is that the system in my opinion has been reformed, has been changed. Those behaviors have been eradicated. If we take a look at Sharat's classroom, if there's one thing that we can definitively say about Sharat, is that he has never in any way done any inappropriate touching to any of the students, and that's a very important thing for him.
That's true. I've heard that reported from everybody I've heard speak on that matter. But I would say that one of the things that people want from Sharat that hasn't happened is some kind of formal acknowledgement. Like, there hasn't been any formal acknowledgement that this happened.
Well,
do you think that they should be making some kind of formal statement about it?
I think that we were taking a Western mindset and we're applying it to another culture. And I think we should be very careful about that. What would work with us for someone, say, who's like, if we're thinking in terms of how we would want to handle things in the United States of America based on if this was a head of a corporation or a large organization, and how we would want that organization or the new head of the organization to make a public statement, then that makes sense. But I think that we should be very, very careful of applying that, in a broad, sweeping sense to another culture. And I think that I wasn't in India this past winter, and I really wanted to go, but unfortunately my father passed away, and I was not able to make the trip this year. But I did hear from numerous students in India that Sharat did make a public statement to the the people and the students who were present in Mysore during this season, and that was very meaningful for the students that were there. Unfortunately, I wasn't there. I can't verify it, and I don't know what he said. But I think that if Sharat wants to make a statement about this, that's his choice and it's his process, and I would fully be available to support him through this process. I could only be supportive if he wants to make a statement about this. At the same time, I do know that within I just feel that we should be very sensitive and careful not to immediately export our cultural expectations for how something should be dealt with to another culture. I just think we should be sensitive about that.
I understand that. Even in like the tradition that I align with more, the TKV Desikachar Krishnamacharya tradition, there's lots of that too. But I have to say that it isn't just a matter of like putting our cultural expectations onto them, because there's a lot of people like yourself who have careers built on the teachings of Patabhi Jois, and they're here in the West. And I guess we just have to be careful because I'm concerned that we're not giving enough voice to the victims, and what do they deserve in all of this? Like, I've even heard people talking about, like, we haven't gotten there yet, but you started like a crowdsourcing campaign for Dana Falsetti. Should there be a fund for victims?
Well, if the victims I would be very happy to facilitate a mediation and a discussion with any of the victims in the Ashtanga Yoga method. I would be very happy to have an open dialogue and a discussion with them to discuss, what atonement are they looking for? Is it monetary? Because if they want to GoFundMe, for monetary remuneration to make up for what they've experienced, I would be more than happy to, facilitate that. If they, what do they want? Do they want a formal apology? I can't write that from Sharat, but I could certainly take their request and communicate it to him. Yeah. I would be, I think in the voice of the victims, I think that we are at a place where it's like, well, what do you want? And then I think that there is a mediation. What do you need in order to heal? What sort of acknowledgement do you need in order to heal? And one thing that I think is a delicate line to walk is, when you're hurting, when you've been hurt by someone and by a circumstance, everything in you just wants to kind of burn the house down. And I think it's a very delicate line to walk. I'm walking that line myself right now. And it's this delicate line of, how can you make your grievance stated in a way that simply doesn't say, okay, we'll burn the house down. I want to burn the house down. I want to make everyone understand, and feel my pain to that degree. So it's like, okay, so this happened to me. This was not acceptable. What changes? What do we want? What do you need in order to heal? What do we need as a community in order to set up rules and guidelines so that never happens again? And I would be absolutely available to facilitate a mediation on that.
Well, I know at the recent Confluence, there was a representative from RAIN mediating, and Mary Taylor was there, and as you said, there was a discussion. So I know that even within the broader Ashtanga community, there are efforts that have been put forth, and I think that's encouraging. And even just hearing you say that you're open to the dialogue, I think that's all good. I also just continue to feel like we have to make sure that we're not shutting down victims, and that I might disagree with you a little bit, because I understand your argument about the cultural differences, but the Ashtanga community, that's like an organization. They're authorized teachers. I don't know if are you an officially authorized teacher?
I'm an officially certified teacher. Yeah. And, I'm not saying that's I'm not giving that as an excuse of why Sharat hasn't made an answer or anything like that. I just do think that there's a touch of sensitivity that needs to be accounted for when we think about, it's almost like cultural translation. If you have a friend of yours that's coming over from another country and they don't act exactly as you would want them to act, I think there are clear moral and ethical guidelines that are universal. And at the same time, I also think it's like, wait a minute, is he dealing with that way because of where he's from, but he actually means well? So there's just a little bit of filtering that needs to go on. The second thing is that really, I haven't spoken with Sharat. I haven't sat down to have a conversation with him about this. So I'm not really at liberty to even possibly think about what he should or shouldn't do, because I haven't had a conversation with him about this. So
is that something that you would want to do? Like, why haven't you? Isn't there like a lot going on that you'd want to talk to him about? Or what was your relationship to him before?
Yeah, my relationship to Sharad is that I don't have long distance phone calls with him to discuss things. Yeah. When I'm his student, and then there's an opportunity to speak and ask questions that are pertinent to my development as a student. So he's my teacher. Yeah. He's not my best friend. I don't contact him. I don't have like chit chats with him over the phone and this sort of thing. So I very much do my best to uphold my role as a student. So I don't have a relationship where I'm going to pick up the phone and say, hey, did you read these, blog posts from, Karen Rain, and what do you think about that? And do you think that the Ashtanga community should make a statement? I just don't have that relationship with him. There are other people who might, but I don't, I don't have that. I don't have that relationship with him. If I had been in Mysore this season, I think that it would have definitely come up as I mentioned, it came up in conference and he spoke about it. So I think there would have been an opportunity then, but so I feel that Sharad is my teacher now, and before I'm going to make any statement about what I think he should or shouldn't do, I'm going to do the respect to my teacher to talk to him first, And I think that that's the very least that I, as a student, could do is to not make any proclamations about what Sharad should or shouldn't do until I get a chance to speak to him and evaluate and discuss from his perspective.
Well, I hear what you're saying, and it seems to me when you say that, it occurs to me that on some level, I started this conversation saying that you were on a list of people who took yoga into the mainstream, and it seems to me like you do have a little bit of a different scenario than a lot of other folks, because your teaching has existed kind of on its own, separate from Ashtanga in ways, because of your higher profile that happened for you. So yeah. You do, I don't know, there was sort of a thing back when I wrote it a while back, some years ago, it was called Your Yoga Teacher is the Brand, because it used to be more like what, back in the day, and when you got into it, it was certainly the case, where your credibility as a teacher was the lineage, that you cited who your teacher was, and that in many ways defined you as a teacher in certain ways. But at a certain point that did change, and people aren't as interested in branded systems. Anyasara fell, and it's much more about the individual teacher and their integrity and people connecting to that. And Kino MacGregor is a name as a yoga teacher, separate from Ashtanga Vinyasa as a system. If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.